The night was thick with summer heat when the Ashford family vanished. Their Virginia plantation house stood silent at dawn, doors flung open, livestock loose, candles still burning. The breakfast table had been set for 7, yet not a single body was ever found. Only one detail survived in the whispers of terrified neighbors. A butcher's knife, blackened with age, wedged into the front door, its wooden handle carved with a single word, Isaac. The story was hushed immediately. Newspapers refused to print it. Local pastors dismissed it as rumor. But for over a century, the people of Surry County have spoken of Isaac the Butcher, an enslaved man whose vengeance was so unspeakable, so thorough, that entire families were erased without leaving so much as a grave. What remains is not history, but a curse buried in silence and shame. And tonight we exhume it. In 1823, Isaac was a nameless slave on the Ashford plantation. His value was not measured in wages but in weight. How many hogs he could slaughter, how quickly he could skin, salt, and carve. The locals called him the butcher, though his skill with the blade carried no honor, only fear. Children whispered that he spoke to the carcasses as he cut, that he could keep a heart beating outside the chest for a few terrible seconds. Plantation ledgers confirm Isaac's existence, though his last name was never recorded. He was property, a shadow, a man reduced to meat. But the journals of Mistress Caroline Ashford contain an unsettling note. Isaac is taken to staring at me with eyes I do not recognize. I feel the weight of them even when he is not in the room. It would be the last entry in her diary before the pages fell silent. After the Ashfords disappeared, the local church, the very heart of Surry County social order, became the keeper of secrets. Sermons thunder with warnings against rebellion, against the beast that wears a man's skin. Yet, in the cellar of St. Luke's Chapel, townsfolk found deep scratches carved into stone. They were not words, but crude diagrams of the human body, lines and cuts mapping tendons, arteries, and joints. Whispers claimed Isaac had hidden there after the slaughter, practicing his art not on pigs, but on those who pursued him. Slave catchers sent to drag him back were never seen again. The pastor told his flock these drawings were the devil's work. But some say he kept one of the diagrams locked away in the vestry, and when the chapel was rebuilt a generation later, the cornerstone was laid upon bones not animal but human. 10 years after the Ashfords' vanishing, an orphanage opened on the edge of the plantation grounds. Officially, it was funded by the Virginia Ladies Benevolent Society, but locals swore it was a way to mask what had truly happened. Children reported hearing voices at night, low, heavy whispers in the kitchen where Isaac once worked. Some claimed to see a man's shadow standing at the chopping block, though no one was there. A physician who inspected the orphanage in 1842 wrote of strange wounds that appeared on the children's bodies, incisions too clean, too precise for accidents. His report vanished from county records, but the doctor himself soon abandoned his practice and fled the state. The orphanage closed within the decade, leaving behind only a well in the yard. When drained years later, it revealed bones that belonged neither to children nor adults, but something in between. By the late 19th century, the tale of Isaac the Butcher was buried deeper than any grave. Historical societies expunge him from the records. Plantation tours never mentioned the Ashfords. Even census documents were mysteriously missing pages for 1823, as though the year itself had been erased. But silence is weight, and in the state archives of Richmond, one folder survives, marked only with the word suppressed. Inside lies a single sheet, a slave inventory with Isaac's name circled in red, and beneath it a chilling scrawl, never written, never told, never unearthed. Yet here we are, unearthing, and with each word we awaken what generations tried to keep chained in shadow. In 1851, a traveling surgeon named Dr. Ephraim Colt arrived in Surry County. His journals, recovered decades later, describe his fascination with the butcher. He had heard whispers of Isaac's precision, of wounds that resembled surgical cuts rather than savage strikes. Colt's ledger reveals diagrams eerily similar to those found beneath the church. But one passage chills the most. I believe Isaac understood something about the body that even we physicians have not yet grasped. He carved not to kill, but to liberate, separating flesh from spirit. Not long after Colt's writings, he vanished on a return trip through Virginia's back roads. His horse was found tethered near the ruins of Ashford Plantation, saddle soaked in blood, but his body never recovered. Only his bag remained. Inside it, a single preserved hand, fingers curled around a carving knife. By the Civil War, Isaac's legend had become a ghost story to terrify children. Yet some children seemed to invoke him willingly. In 1863, Union soldiers camped near Surry County reported local black children gathering around campfires, whispering in unison, "Isaac, Isaac, Isaac." One soldier, Corporal Andrew Lane, wrote home describing how the children's voices deepened, their cadence becoming unnatural. He swore the shadows behind them lengthened into the shape of a man holding a butcher's blade. His letter ends abruptly with a sentence scratched out, so violently the paper tore. Corporal Lane was later listed as missing in action, though his regiment never entered combat that night. His tent was discovered shredded, its canvas hanging in strips, as though cut by hands that knew exactly where to slice. In 1877, St. Albans Seminary was founded just outside the county line, a school for training ministers. From its earliest days, strange disturbances plagued the halls. Students reported waking with surgical lines traced in ash upon their arms and chests. Faculty dismissed it as pranks, until one morning a novice preacher was found hanging in the chapel, skin flayed in symmetrical patterns. Behind the pulpit, investigators uncovered a panel carved with initials, IB. No student bore those letters. No faculty member admitted responsibility. The initials were later chiseled out and replaced with plaster. Yet, when the seminary was renovated in the 1920s, workers found the letters had reappeared, deeper, darker, as though burned into the wood from within. The seminary's archives do not mention the incident, but oral accounts from surviving clergy insist that every sermon delivered in that chapel carried with it a weight, a heaviness that pressed on lungs and shortened breath. By the turn of the century, Surry County began to erase more than just Isaac. Birth certificates disappeared. Death records grew inconsistent. Families swore entire branches of their lineage simply vanished from official memory. One courthouse clerk, Rebecca Hayes, confessed in her old age that she had been ordered to burn any documents containing Isaac's name. She recalled one file in particular, a deed transferring plantation land to the state in 1834. At the bottom, in thick black ink, someone had scrawled, "Paid in flesh." Hayes destroyed it as instructed, but not before she claimed to see droplets of red seeping through the paper, smearing her hands. She left her post the next day, never to work again. In 1902, folklorist Margaret Bell attempted to collect oral histories from Surrey's elders. She described arriving in towns where entire families locked their doors when she asked about Isaac. Children were pulled indoors. One farmer spat at her feet, muttering, "Some meat should never be remembered." But Bell persisted. She eventually convinced a 94-year-old woman, a descendant of the Ashfords' overseer, to speak. The woman's voice trembled as she whispered, "He didn't kill them, not the way they say. He took them apart, like they was never people, just pieces." Bell's recordings were sent to the Library of Congress, but were mysteriously misplaced. Only a single reel survives, mislabeled and buried in a collection of Appalachian folk songs. On it, a faint woman's voice repeats one name, over and over, in a tone that grows weaker, almost reverent. "Isaac, Isaac, Isaac. In 1912, school children in Surrey County were overheard chanting a rhyme during recess. Teachers assumed it was a nonsense song until they noticed the words. Isaac cuts, Isaac sews. Isaac takes what no one knows. Hide your hands, hide your eyes. Butcher comes when silence lies. The teachers tried to ban the rhyme, but it spread across classrooms like infection. Children sang it in unison, eyes glazed, their voices droning in a rhythm that felt less like play and more like prayer. When questioned, no child could remember who taught them the words. A superintendent reported the incident to Richmond officials, but his letter was returned unopened with notes scrawled across the envelope. We do not archive the dead. In 1920, an orphan named Samuel Dykes disappeared from the county asylum. Weeks later, he staggered out of the woods barefoot, clothes shredded, whispering a single word, butcher. Doctors recorded that Samuel's body bore surgical incisions, perfectly symmetrical, running along his rib cage and down his arms. Yet no vital organs had been removed, no blood lost. The wounds were impossibly precise, almost instructional. When asked who did this to him, Samuel gave no answer. Instead, he began carving lines into the asylum's wooden tables with a fork, tracing diagrams of human muscle and bone. Within months, Samuel vanished again, this time for good. His cell door was found unlocked, and inside, carved deep into the plaster wall, were two letters, I.B. In 1929, a Richmond newspaper briefly mentioned the house on Maiden Creek, once owned by descendants of the Ashfords. The family had abandoned it, claiming the walls breathed at night. Servants reported hearing the steady rasp of inhalation in the plaster, exhalation through the floorboards. When investigators entered, they discovered Butcher's hooks embedded in the rafters, though no one admitted to installing them. On the kitchen wall, painted in animal blood, was a rough human silhouette with dotted lines across its torso. The article was pulled from circulation within 48 hours. Surviving copies were destroyed, save for one page archived by a librarian who defied orders. That page today sits in a private collection, its ink smeared as though by damp, greasy fingers. In 1936, a choir from St. Luke's, the same church that once had Isaac's diagrams, performed in Richmond. Eyewitnesses described their hymn as unbearably heavy, the notes vibrating like a dirge. When a photographer developed an image of performance, he fainted. The choir's faces had not appeared on the film. Instead, every singer's head was blurred, replaced with a single carved mark, a vertical slash, identical on each. Officials dismissed it as a photographic error. Yet the photographer swore the negative itself bore the cuts, etched into the emulsion not by light, but by something sharper. He abandoned his profession soon after, claiming, "A knife has no shadow, only silence." By 1941, Isaac's legend had become the obsession of a few historians who dared to dig where others refused. The Virginia Folk Museum prepared an exhibit titled Forgotten Figures of the South. Among the items, the surgeon's ledger, fragments from the orphanage, and the preserved hand found in Dr. Colt's bag. The night before the exhibit opened, fire consumed the museum. Witnesses claimed the flames moved unnaturally, as though tracing lines, cutting through wood and glass in deliberate sections. Firefighters later discovered the artifacts arranged in a circle of ash, untouched by flame, as if deliberately spared. All were confiscated by state authorities. Their whereabouts remain unknown. Official records list the fire as accidental, but in the town's memory, it was the butcher's hand reclaiming what belonged to him. In 1947, Surrey County opened a veterans' hospital to treat soldiers returning from the war. Within months, patients began reporting visions during surgery. Men under anesthesia spoke of a tall figure in a blood-stained apron, standing over the doctors, guiding their hands. One nurse, Eleanor Price, recorded that after a routine amputation, the patient woke screaming, "Not his knife, not his knife." When she asked what he saw, he described a blade older than the war, heavier, curved like a butcher's cleaver. Price's diary was confiscated after her sudden death from illness. Yet in the margins of her final entry she had scrawled, "Isaac walks the halls. The butcher doesn't die. He teaches." In 1952, a historian named Paul Kettering unearthed photos from the ruins of the Ashford Plantation. They showed only trees, field, and collapsing barns. But in every frame, a shadow stretched across the ground. Always the same height, always in the same stance, cleaver raised. Kettering pinned the photos to his office wall. Colleagues reported he began talking to them as though they were windows. Weeks later, Kettering disappeared. His office door had been locked from the inside. Yet his body was never found. The photographs remained, but the shadow in them was gone. To this day, archivists refuse to handle the negatives. One wrote anonymously, "The butcher steps out when stared at too long." By the mid-1950s, Isaac became an unspeakable rumor in academic circles. A professor at William and Mary, Dr. Ruth Ellison, attempted to lecture on suppressed slave revolts of Virginia. Midway through her talk, students claim her voice faltered. She began drawing on the blackboard, not words, but incisions, lines across a chalk outline of a body. Ellison's hand trembled, yet she could not stop. When she finally dropped the chalk, her fingers were bleeding as if cut by invisible blades. She never lectured again. Her notes for the class end with one final phrase, underlined 3 times. He was not killing. He was arranging. On the edge of Surry County lies a field locals call the Quiet Acre. There are no tombstones, only low mounds where soil has sagged unnaturally, as if bodies once lay there and then dissolved. In 1957, surveyors discovered human teeth scattered across the field. No skulls, no bones, just teeth arranged in concentric circles. The site was quickly fenced off, declared state property. But farmers nearby still whisper that at night they hear knives scraping stone, like whetstones drawn across steel. The field is avoided to this day, not because it is cursed, but because it is hungry. And so the legend circles back, heavier with each telling. Isaac the butcher, a man erased, a slave reduced to property, has become something more than human. Was he vengeance incarnate? A fragment of ritual too ancient for the churches to smother? Or simply the echo of trauma that this country buried but never healed? The records remain silent. The archives stay locked. The state denies everything. Yet silence is never empty. It is the weight of voices swallowed whole. And if you stand in Surry County on a windless night, some swear you can hear it. The slow, steady rasp of a blade being drawn across the air. If these forgotten shadows unsettle you, subscribe. More stories wait in the dark, and some truths are only revealed when you dare to return.